Good morning. I'm the Chief Information Officer at USSA Malaysia, and my primary job, as was just mentioned, is teaching sports science, mostly to Malaysian physical educators. But my real love is the Sport Kid Project website, which I started too long ago. I don't write often enough for it, or as often as I should. But it's about athlete development, sport development, and lately it's been focusing a little bit on talent and how we create talent in sport.
Shut up, Nick.
Before I started working for USSA Malaysia, I was a professional swimming coach for almost 30 years. And one of the things I learned in professional coaching is that coaches, as well as teachers, have a hold on the people they work with to create talent in those people. We may not be actually talented, and as you'll see my slides, the creative spark has not hit me. But I know how to create talent in young people, in young athletes. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes. One of my jobs as a head swimming coach, in addition to the actual coaching that I did, was making sure that our club, which was a commercial operation, met budget. Since I wanted to get paid every month, we had to make sure that we had enough people in the club, either as people taking swimming lessons or as members of our competitive team. So every month we would have what we called open tryouts for people to come in to the club and just join the club to see if they would like competitive swimming. And I noticed over time that of the boys that showed up for those tryouts, most of them were 10 years old, overweight, and had no athletic skills. So I'm wondering, how did these people get interested in swimming? Because it was obvious to me after watching them swim that they had the only sport experience they had came from playing video games. And then I tried to imagine the conversation that occurred at home before Junior showed up at the pool between mom and dad, thinking, all right, Junior's watching too much television, he doesn't get any exercise, what are we going to do? So American football, dad mentions American football, mom puts it into that right away, of course not, he'll get hurt. Somebody mentions soccer, Junior doesn't have any endurance activity watching TV, so there's too much running in soccer for Junior to get interested. Dad mentions baseball, but let's face it, baseball is boring, right? Junior wouldn't like that. So finally, mom in the back of her head thinks of something and she says, you know, he really likes swimming in grandma's pool. And then they show up, the rest is history, they're out on my pool deck a couple of days later. Now Junior's idea of swimming and my idea of swimming were kind of different. His day at the pool consisted of cannonballing and crazy dives into grandma's pool. My day at the pool consisted mainly of training people on how to swim, which swimming is kind of a fairly vigorous activity, and if you're not active to begin with, it might be kind of hard to get into it as an athlete. So Junior had his hands full just starting off. But as I became more and more experienced as a coach, I knew two things. One, if Junior joined my team, I would have a very short amount of time to get him hooked on the activity. And the second thing I knew is that if Junior was ever going to have a chance at being what we would term a talented athlete, maybe not a Michael Phelps, but someone that could represent his school or his state or his country. If he was ever going to get to that point, at that initial stage, that was entirely up to me. Now later on, it would be a shared responsibility. Junior would have to take some responsibility for his performance. But at the beginning, it was my job. If he failed, I failed. So that was where I started with these 10-year-old boys. The girls were never a problem. The girls that showed up were always good athletes. I don't know why. But the boys were a different story. So my job came, get these guys into the sport, get them hooked and keep them involved as long as possible, because the longer they were in it, the more they had a chance of actually learning something and becoming talented, getting off the couch. When we did this, this is one of the most famous quotes in talent or expertise research. And it's by Benjamin Bloom. When I dealt with Junior, I realized that talent in young people is not evident, although that's a common assumption that we make every day, especially in sports. If you go out and watch a soccer game where there's 10-year-olds running up and down the field, you can stand there and look at all the certain 10-year-olds that you are going to say they're talented. That person is talented. This person is talented. As a coach of 30 years, I can look at the field and I'll see 10-year-olds running up and down the field. To me, none of them are talented, or all of them are talented. It's hard to make that judgment. So what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't judge whether or not young athletes are talented at any time. We just don't know. In the 1980s, Benjamin Bloom, one of the famous expertise researchers, if you're a teacher, you probably recognize his name from Bloom's taxonomy. He did a study on whether or not children were actually talented, or how they were talented at young ages, and how that carried on throughout their life. So he did what was later called the Development of Talent Project. And he got a group of teenagers together who were talented in art, science, and sports. Now, he used the same hypothesis that we use every day. If we see someone that's talented, we assume that they were always talented. Bloom got these teenagers together and interviewed parents, teachers, coaches, friends, and found something unusual. None of the people in his study exhibited any real talent at younger ages. So the hypothesis that once talented, always talented sort of fell apart. But this quote on the screen is what Bloom had to say in an interview following the initial publication of his research. He said, "We were looking for exceptional kids, and what we found were exceptional conditions." Now, these conditions that Bloom mentioned were probably some that are popping into your head right now. A talented musician, a teenager who's talented at music, might have parents who are music teachers or music aficionados or are musicians themselves. Same thing with scientists. If you're a math teacher, chances are better for your children to be good at math than someone else's children who is not a math teacher. All right? These things don't always work out, but the probability is in those favor. Same thing with sports. You don't have to be an athlete to have children who are good at sports, but you do have to be active, at least in Bloom's research. One of the things we do in coaching is we have to answer the question of how we get athletes from this point. These are some of my best swimmers when they were 7 years old. They were a relay getting ready for a race. How they get from this point to this point, where they're competing in large competitions, you're a successful athlete. In my world, I would say swimming is your thing. That's what you do. How do you get from the beginning to this point? In Bloom's research, he would say that it's a history or a cascade of events that happens in the athlete's life that causes this to happen. And the spark that causes this, as I said in the beginning, it's back to the coach. The coach directs that development. The coach creates the environment. Any teachers in this room know that as a teacher, you create the environment in your classroom. Now, it might be different for older students, but for young students, that's your baby. The classroom is your world. If the environment is conducive for teaching, it's because you created that environment. And it's exactly the same in coaching. So as I got older coaching and moved along in my 30 years of coaching, I realized that when I walked on the pool deck, that was my realm. If anything good happened there, it was because of me. If anything bad happened there, it was because of me. So any decisions that had to be made about how the program was going to run or how we were going to get athletes from one point to the next required a lot of planning on my part. Now, I knew it as we went along that some things work, so you just keep doing them day after day. You don't really think about them that much. But it's creating the environment that matters. Another thing we do in sport is we judge athletes too early. You've probably heard of talent identification. Lots of countries now, in fact, Malaysia is doing a talent identification plan, or they're trying to. Talent identification, if there's anybody that can identify talent in young athletes, I'd like to know who they are, because we can't do it yet. We might be able to do it in the future, but it's just not something that's possible yet. The other thing, and along with talent identification, what we usually do is we mistake early ability in sport for talent, when really all it is people growing up too fast or faster than others. One of the main questions we ask in sport for an athlete or a child when they join a program, how old are you? And they'll tell you, I'm 9, I'm 10, whatever. The thing that we made a mistake in sport is, if you watch the group of soccer players I mentioned before that are 10 years old, you're always going to see somebody that's obviously more, has more ability than somebody else on the team. And you might think that person is talented. But here's another thing to think about. Maybe that person is just older than the other people they're playing with. If I have two 7-year-olds, let's say they're born in 2007, and one was born in December, and the other one was born in January, the one in January is effectively a year older than the one that was born in December. Now, if you're 30 years old, that 1-year difference in age is not going to make a difference between you and other 30-year-olds. But for a 7-year-old, parents know that that 1 year's difference in age in a 7-year-old can be gigantic. And that shows up in sport. 7, 10, 12 years old even. So the main question is, how old are you in sport? This chart is of soccer players in Europe. The pink-colored cells, or the orange-colored cells, are live births spread out throughout the year. So you have 300, whatever it is, per 1,000 live births per year per month in Europe. The purple cells are the membership or the birth dates of the players on European teams for under 17, under 19, and under 21. Now you'll notice that these cells are taller at the beginning part of the year. The reason for this is how sport associations calculate age. Anybody born in a certain year is that age. If you were born in 2007, that's the year that they're going to calculate your age from. It doesn't matter whether you were born in January or December. So most of these people, these are talented athletes here. So most of these people were born in the first part of the year. In relative age, that means as they moved up, they were performing better than others their same age, but they might have been bigger. So we can see that someone in January someone born in January that competes against someone born in December will probably perform better. And if that happens at 10 years old, the people that organize select teams are going to pick that person, say, you're talented, you come with us, we're going to give you more training, we're going to put you on a different team. And the person born in January sort of gets left behind. And it keeps on happening until we have a group of soccer players that are old enough to represent their state or their country. And if you look at the rosters, you're going to find many of them are born towards the first part of the year. The most famous case of this happening was with Canadian junior hockey players. In the 1990s, somebody noticed that the birth dates of Canadian junior hockey players, 50% of them were born in the first 3 months of the year, January, February, March. And 75% of the members of the team were born in the first 6 months of the year. So it's a relative age thing. How old are you makes a big difference in sport. And we constantly mistake talent by just giving it to the older players. You think somebody that's bigger is obviously better. These players are all the same age. The one in the red shirt is probably the biggest player there. But look at the two little ones in the front. They're the same age as the guy in the red jersey. These two boys are the same age. If you had to judge, I would say, or you might say that the boy in the white jersey is probably more talented than the boy in the blue jersey. Why? Because he's bigger. And as children get bigger, they also get stronger and faster. There are 4 components to talent. As a coach, I recognize that if these 4 components can be brought together, you're going to be able to make a program that's able to produce talent. The first is opportunity. Players have to have a chance to actually play the game. I'm not talking about 1 or 2 weeks out of the year. They actually have to have a chance to play. The second is feedback. The coach has to be able to provide the proper feedback at the proper time. Most coaches, when they start off, they're going to tell the player almost everything they know about a sport every time the player performs. That's not important. The player can't use all that information. The player only needs to know one thing, and that one thing is, what can you do next time to make a better performance? The third thing is practice, and we've all heard about deliberate practice, 10,000 hours of practice. Everybody likes to make fun of 10,000 hours nowadays, but practice is important. Deliberate practice is important. And finally, there's ignition. This is my favorite one, and this is the one where the coach's connection to creativity and creating talent is evident. The coach has to be able to provide the young athlete with ignition. In research, we call this motivation, but I like ignition better because it explains exactly what's going on. You're getting an athlete that's interested in something, so much so that they just grab onto it and it becomes their way of life. It replaces video games. It keeps them up late at night and gets them out of bed early in the morning. That's ignition. And if you can get your athletes to that point, then talent is on its way. You're creating talent by having your athletes interested in the activity. Finally, I'd just like to say that that's what coaches do. They create talented athletes. You create the talent. Thank you very much.